Do you think that we can realistically shift the cultural narrative around this topic of women being too much?
Absolutely. Now, the question you're asking is, can we shift it faster?
Yeah.
Accelerate? Absolutely.
It's not bossy, it's speaking up for yourself.
The stereotype of a girl today is not the same as a stereotype of a girl in the 1920s, thankfully. I think that the most beautiful thing we have in human relationships, it's a man and a woman discussing without being romantically involved, without having economic ties, leisurely talking about society, the world. That's wonderful. If you think of that, it's amazing. Yeah. It doesn't happen everywhere in the world.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Hello, I'm Bossy, and I'm joined by Anne-Laure Sellier, who's a behavioral scientist and a professor at HEC Paris, and someone whose work I greatly admire around identity, time, decision-making. I think what I love most about how you talk is that you have these scientific insights and human nuances to questions. And that's at the heart of this series, which is why I'm thrilled to have you here, because it's all about power and what it means to be too much and owning your own voice. So thank you so much for joining us this morning.
It is my absolute pleasure, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
So I was thinking when we first started talking, if you had ever been called bossy or too much, or if you, any sort of term that goes along with that sort of an idea that you are too much of something.
I have never been called bossy, which is why when you invited me to this podcast, I thought, why? I was almost, you wonder whether you're thrilled or offended. Why did she pick me for an I am bossy kind of girl? And then, of course, you retrieve memories and what people have told you about the way you come across. And certainly there have been notions of bossiness that I've heard, but not with the term bossy. Mm-hmm. I've been called insolent.
Oh.
In a German setting, frech. Frech, it means insolent in German, but with a smile. So it was a good frech, good insolence, but still insolent.
Right.
I've been called French in England, which is the worst.
Yeah, that's not a compliment, no matter how you bend that one. I'm not sure from.
And so French in England is a mixture, especially for women, it's a mixture of light and too much and arrogant and taking center stage compared to a certain stereotype of the good, proper British woman. Mm-hmm. And that was in deep England. It was not, I'm not talking London, I'm talking very, very British countryside, mm-hmm. Where I was staying for a year. And I've been told by my closed ones, like, yes, sometimes you're coming out too strong. Mm-hmm. That I can be extremely forward, extremely direct. And it's kind of interesting because then then there are things where you wonder, okay, so here I should correct my behavior because clearly others are signaling it's too much. And at other times, and yes, that's what we're going to talk about, you think about it and you're like, actually, it's completely okay. The more I think about it, the more I think it's absolutely okay.
Yeah.
So am I still insolent today? I wouldn't say so. So I try to avoid insolent because insolent is I try to avoid it too much. And I try to keep that so-called insolence under a more appropriate way of going about it. But I haven't certainly I haven't withdrawn, right? Because I also understand, thanks to research, and I'm happy to talk about the abundant research we have now available, which is interesting for your auditors, maybe more than hearing about me, hearing about the research they can read.
Yeah. I would love to.
That shows why, like what are factors explaining why a woman can be labeled bossy when a man with the exact same behavior would be deemed completely normal or even shy.
Yeah. So is why why are we labeled like that more than, I mean, a man is never called bossy. I've never heard a man called bossy when I think about it. I mean, maybe, strict or authoritarian or, something. But I've never heard like that sort of a term, almost like you're you're just being too much, right? Why do you think women have that happen to them? Almost like it's a fake authority, right? Bossy is almost like you're trying to be a boss, but you're not really a boss.
That's right. So if I think of the research we have available, there is considerable research showing that we live. So I mean, in psychology, we've known for a very long time that human thought is made of stereotypes, prototypes. Right. So when
Hmm.
we have when we think of the world, we think in terms of schemas. So when we think of a woman and a man, we have schemas, and these schemas, it so happens in our Western societies at least, um, differ markedly. Yeah. And there are expectations associated with each. And one expectation of women is that they be, nice and submissive and quiet, and caring, and while men are autonomous, independent, strong, dominant, right?
Yeah.
So all these associations that were very much associated with each gender, and now we know that gender is a fluid thing,
Right.
and that it's not because you're a woman that you can't be dominant, and conversely you can be a man and can be submissive, right? I mean, it doesn't, these things are completely free associating, if you will, but
Hmm.
it remains that the schemas we have as a society and the schemas we grew up with, including you and me as women,
Yeah.
we want to belong. So when we grow up and the entire environment is telling us this is what a woman should do, well, you do it.
Right.
Because you want to belong. You live up to the expectations of the people around you, right?
Hmm.
It's not just a courtesy, it's a way we evolve. We've always evolved as a species. We're a social animal, and we want to be minimally liked by others. Otherwise, we're ostracized, we're
Yeah.
kicked out of the tribe, and we are Cain,
Yeah.
wandering the roads away from everybody, and no one wants that.
Right.
So we live up to that. And the research on women, and so I work at HEC Paris. You mentioned it. I'm a professor in a business school, right? In a world that's already very male dominated, and so the research on female leaders, on female managers, shows that there's a lot of self-censorship that women are suffering from that they're not even aware of.
Mm.
Um, I can give you one example. We say no much less easily than men say no. And in a work environment, for instance, there are things we're asked to do that help us advance our careers.
Yeah.
There are many more things we're asked to do that do not advance our careers.
Mm.
And those things generally you're asked, oh, Catherine, do you mind, would you mind going out with this, client for dinner? We know it's outside of your working hours, and it's just we're also overwhelmed. And we would really appreciate if you did that, please. That kind of question, when asked to a woman, gets a yes from a woman way more often than a yes from a man.
Mm.
And so you do it,
Right.
and you do that throughout the day. Yeah. And we have the data. We see after
Yeah.
20, 30 years of doing that you've lost $500,000 of earnings in your career. Because you were just a nice girl, and you tried to make by and live up to the expectations that society has, including in your work environment, for being a nice woman.
Yeah.
The same data exists showing that if you say no as a woman, you're actually penalized more. Like
Huh.
people think it's more inappropriate. So, you say yes also because you do sense
Yeah.
that if you say no, people are like, oh, this, what a B word,
Right.
right?
It's like a lose-lose. You're just
That's right. So it's actually very tricky because it's, you could say, well, then, oh, thank you, and oh, great. Our auditors tomorrow should go to work and start
right.
saying no to these things, that at least those tasks and activities that don't
Right.
move their career. But it's not that simple, because if you do that too often, then your reputation goes downhill very
Right.
quickly.
Yeah.
So you have to surf. It's really like a surfer on a wave, where you
Yeah.
have a sense, okay, so here I'm going to say no to this big non-promotable task that is really going to allow me to work on my career,
Hmm.
right? And then at other times I'll say yes, because to some extent I
Right.
have the schema. I can't just break away from it. I can't be a
Right.
boy. Yeah,
Right.
it's clearly backfiring.
That's even when you fake asked me that question, I got that feeling in my chest like, oh, you have to say, they asked so nicely, you have to say yes to that just because it's expected, right? And this is how, you know, when people ask you something and ask it to you nicely, you're supposed to say yes to it, regardless of like, if you can physically make it happen, if time can bend enough, to make this happen, then you need to do it. And it's true. I don't think that that same pressure is definitely put on men. It is, to obviously to some extent because you want to advance your career and say yes to things, but there's also like the hard no. And I don't know that women are allowed to have the hard no as often.
Um, it's harder. So there is an asymmetry, right? That's the recurrent finding, that if I say no and a man in my position says no, it is not perceived in the same way. I'll give you an example. I have an anecdote that I love referring back to, because it's one of those moments. Sometimes you're like, oh my goodness, we're in there.
Yeah.
We are not, So at HEC Paris is, of course, a university that's super progressive, sorry, and that really tries to go against these biases. But it's hard, even when you're aware, it's hard. And we're a faculty body that's 75% male,
Okay.
25% female. And every year there is a new faculty day in which a bunch of the existing faculty welcomes the new hires. Yeah. And so, typical of a non-promotable task, you do it for collegiality.
Right.
It takes an afternoon, right, off of your research work or teaching work. And so it's really it's not bringing you anything other than you're a nice person. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there is an admin, a person who is in charge of doing this event. And she calls me at some point and says, no, it would be really appreciated. It's welcoming at junior faculty,
Hmm.
and you're nice, and we love to have you, blah, blah, blah. And so, you hear the three
Right.
layers of paint. And out of curiosity, I said, okay, I happen to be free that afternoon. Okay, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Who's there? Who are my colleagues? Yeah. And 5 people, 5 women. So I
Oh,
said, hang on. How come? How is it possible? By what statistical law
yeah.
did you get out of 75% male faculty? It should be a random draw.
Right. Right.
I should have 3 out of 5 at least
Yeah.
being male. How do you end up with 5 women? That's remarkable. That's
It's
that cannot be
magic.
arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, I refuse actually to be one of 5 women. I think that is terrible for the image of the school. Like if I were a young faculty member and I would be welcomed by 5 female faculty in a faculty of 25% female faculty, I would be horrified.
Yeah.
And it hit her. That's when it hit her. And it's the admin was female as well. She was like, yeah, but I mean, the problem is the male faculty. I call them and they tell me they have a paper to move on. And I said, well, and I don't have papers.
And the
I have
women don't,
text,
right?
right? Well, but when we ask you, I mean, you're listening more. And I said, well, but you do know for a fact we have the same job. Yeah. And I start telling her about this research. And I said, look, of course, I mean, you have to actually be much more conservative with women, solicit them less. Yeah. You already have 25% of scientists in a world where we have trouble
Yeah.
having female scientists. You need to protect them. So actually, you should aim for 4 out of 5 men. Yeah, know that they will find all the excuses in the world in a very polite way to tell you like, oh, I wish I could have, but I have this huge data set to analyze, um, which is true. And they do it
Right.
and they don't intend to do badly, because the men don't know that the women are saying yes, right?
Right.
They're basically, it's the hot potato you're throwing to the next
Yeah.
person. Right? And women are much more yay sayers than naysayers, and we need that's really a skill that you need to be aware of. So you need to understand that data, and you need to talk a lot. So now, when I say no, I tend to explain everything I've just told you.
Yeah.
I have time to the male person or the female person. I have.
See, that anecdote is exactly why I wanted you to like asked you and was like hoping you would say yes to joining this podcast about bossiness, which is not really bossiness so much as just owning yourself and what you want to get done in this world. Um, because you have the wherewithal, I guess, to use an old-fashioned term, but you have, the strength and the courage, and if you disagree with something, you say that you disagree with it. And you won't go along with, perpetuating, some sort of dialogue that isn't correct. You'll correct it.
Alors, two things. First, it's very nice of you to call me strong and courageous, but I don't think I am. So rather, and we can delve into that, I'm happy to share.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's an upbringing and an environment in which it was either that or I would have simply disappeared.
Did you
Uh,
have
for
brothers?
sure. I had only brothers.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. No, and I'm the last one. So I
Oh,
have
okay.
big brothers, much bigger than me, very alpha male type of brothers,
Hmm.
and a mother who wanted to only have boys. She
Oh,
came from peasantry, what was called peasantry at the time. She was born in a farm in the 1930s, before World War II,
yeah.
in a farm. She was the second born of 4 children, and her older brother was to receive all the terrains and the cows. She
Hmm.
was to receive nothing, and she was raised with her mother telling her, you have to serve your brother.
Oh,
That's where my mom comes from, and that's what she escaped. She was strong and courageous, I can
yeah.
tell you. She exfiltrated herself from an environment that was so deterministic and scary. And so, not very surprisingly, when she started having children, she only dreamt of having boys because her mother had been a very bad mother to her. And she herself had inherited those schemas of, girls are
Right.
zero value. Yeah.
We're like expendable, right? Yeah.
Expendable and useless, and boys are everything. And so she had 2 boys, so far so good. And then when I was born, she literally did not look at me for 3 days. Like she told me later on, she was like, I'm so sorry, it's a horrible thing to say and to do to a baby, but she was, because at the time you didn't have ecographies.
Right.
So she didn't look, and then apparently she told me the doctors were saying, but look at your baby girl, she's very cute, etc., etc. And after 2 3 days, she slowly emerged and felt okay, I can do this,
Yeah.
and a cute baby, and it's going to be fine. But then throughout my childhood, she forbid me to do ballet dancing. Good thing I didn't like ballet anyway. I wasn't attracted, but there was no option. Huh? There was no discussion. Um, and then it's hard to tease out what's me versus what was my upbringing, but I know that I was not into dolls at all. I was
Yeah.
my personality was more of a Jane Goodall type of person,
Yeah.
very much into animals, dogs, horses, reading about all the animals in the world and the flowers. I was very
Mhm.
much a big nature kind of person. I couldn't understand why girls played with dolls. I thought it was completely idiotic. I remember looking at Barbie and thinking, oh my goodness, this is like plastic. I mean,
What are you
what
supposed to do with them? Right?
yeah,
Exactly.
it's plastic. I mean,
Right.
it's less, it's not very interesting. But certainly, so she emphasized that I did fencing for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
I did swimming, and then I was so much into animals that I started horseback riding against her will, but because I won 2 weeks of free horseback riding lessons, and I was so into it that actually the horseback riding instructor took me for free from then on to
Oh, wow.
having me on the team, and it became my big passion.
Hmm.
But I was in a family of mostly men, so I had very loud uncles. I grew up in the so in the I would go back to the Alps every summer for 3 months. So
Hmm.
this gigantic summer holiday in France, and so I was living outside, coming back when I was hungry.
Yeah.
And I had this big uncle who was all love but extremely loud. And when you would disagree with him, he would raise his voice, and he had this, roaring voice, right?
Hmm.
Until you were silenced,
Yeah.
basically, which is terrible, right? But so when you say, it's lovely because we hear your voice, and in an environment where you have a mother who is pretty strong, and an
Yeah.
uncle who is even stronger, and then big brothers who are, going like, oh, shut up, you're a girl,
Yeah.
all the time. You at some point you develop and I know you and I have talked about this character before, but it's like a Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah, when I
Yes.
read about Scout, I'm like, yep.
Yeah.
And
You are her too.
I know what you've what you've been through, baby.
Yeah.
Uh, it's interesting because I've been told that, oh, you've been, I know, good, you had like the courage to say this. And to me, it's not a courage at all. It's like, you're surrounded by
Survival.
people and you just speak louder.
Yeah.
And I did it by mimicry, I think, of my uncle and my
Hmm.
not by choice, where I thought, you know what, I'm going to
Yeah.
own the space and start sharpening my voice. I mean, that never happened like that. It was purely either I was completely ignored or I stood my ground. And
How do you think women learn? So you were kind of natured into being who you are in a large part, right? You were nurtured into you're kind of saying into being as courageous as you are because you are. Um, Even though maybe you don't see it like that, but others, you you make your voice heard, and that takes a lot. How do you think as a woman we can learn that behavior? Can we can we learn to be this? Is it through decision making? Is it through um, how do we learn to be that if we're not naturally?
yeah, so to answer that question, I'm going to give you the second part of my answer to your earlier question, which was, you said you're strong and courageous, and then stuff. And we didn't talk about the knowing stuff part. So I have the childhood I had and the upbringing I had, the uncle I had
Yeah.
still around. I'm gonna have him listen to your podcast.
He kind of sounds fantastic in this sort of like
He's
very
amazing.
character sort of way.
Well, he lives on top of a mountain alone with animals. It's perfect.
Oh, that is perfect then for
He
him.
can speak very loud to the
Loudly
mountain.
to them.
It's wonderful. But the second part is then what you read and learn. And it's not one of my key research interests, quite frankly, because I think indeed I've been nurtured. I don't know that nurtured is the word
Yeah,
I want, but
not
I've
anti-nurtured.
been nursed. Exactly. I've been having to come to terms with it and cope with it and find that solution. But there is a body of knowledge. Yeah. So the studies I told you about. So you can, and I think for your auditors, it's so one thing you can do is reflect upon the way you grew up. Yeah. So what your parents encouraged you to be, whether your father or your mother, by the way. Because you can be encapsulated in kind of a societal expectation by either of those figures, right? What your siblings were, right? Whether people called you a tomboy when you were a kid. I was not particularly a tomboy. Huh? I was pretty girly, actually. So it's kind of interesting. But then there is the body of knowledge you can read about, and that's the power of research and of knowledge in general, right? It's not about you, it's not about me, but when you read that, in a sample of 1,000 women and men, the women are behaving this way fundamentally differently from men, then you're like, well, yeah, how do I fare there? Let's assume I'm a woman for a second, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. And so here, for instance, the finding, which is really established now, we have plenty of data across plenty of settings that women self-censor. That's the biggest enemy. The biggest enemy is not, macho guys treating you badly. They do exist, yeah, but that's not the problem. The problem is you.
Yeah.
So I think there is an endless meditation to have upon yourself.
Yeah.
And I still have it today myself because I do shut up a lot, and I think because I'm a woman, yeah, there's a lot of inaction. I think on our part that we have to question. There have been multiple settings. I can't think of one anecdote for you here, but where I thought, oh my goodness, I was such a girl there, right? You can't escape it, right? I mean,
Right.
you're going to be apt in every setting. I remember one of the first times I taught, I was at the London Business School at the time, and I failed a student who was older than me because it was the beginning of my career. So older guy from finance, from the city, right? And he failed in my class for very I could demonstrate. Yeah, it was quantitative. It was easy to demonstrate. And he comes to me, so I give him an F, literally. Right? So he has to retake the course with someone else. And that's going to cost him 3 months. And 3 months in an MBA is an expensive 3 months.
Yeah.
So he comes to my office and he starts explaining, look, I mean, I can't have an F. And I said, well, you showed me you could, actually. It's hard, but you managed. So I don't know how you did it, but you probably didn't work really hard enough in this course. And he started going back, and I could see that there was this tension between us. And at the end, he said, oh, come on, you're a nice girl, right? You've got to understand you can't fail me. You're a nice girl.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I remember at the time being so stunned.
Yeah.
That I didn't, and you see, that's typically the kind of stuff where I was like, yes, I am a nice girl, but you still have an F. Where today, oh my goodness, Catherine, I would react very differently. I would be like, excuse me, would you, I'm going to ask you to repeat this and repeat this time and again until you understand just how incredibly inappropriate what you're saying is, right? But at the time I was so, well, yeah, I'm a nice girl. But
Yeah, you were a nice girl. Yeah.
But that just tells you just how much you can take without even questioning it. Yeah. And there's a lot to be said, I have to say. When the Me Too, we talk about the Me Too movement a lot, and I'm not crazy about the Me Too movement because I think it's gone way too overboard and too far. At the same time, I have to say it was a necessity because if I look back 30 years ago when I was an undergraduate, I got comments from professors that were completely inappropriate.
Yeah.
but it was so embedded in that zeitgeist. It was so normal, so normalized that we were okay with it, right?
Yeah.
So I remember taking a class and having a professor look at me and say, like, you're going to have, looking at me up and down. Yeah. How are you going to prove to me that you're truly engaged in my class? Do you want to come to my office after hours? Right. And you have that and you're like, yeah, fine, bye.
Right.
And you never go. Right.
Right.
But can you imagine like this today? And so, however much I find the Me Too movement too extreme and too brutal, I think it was
Yeah.
something of a necessity.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's calmed things down three notches in many
Yeah.
environments, and that's for good.
It is. I think that there was just an incident, you know, with my daughter and some of her friends, and they a similar sort of inappropriate incident with someone, and they spoke up and they went and they talked to someone in authority about the situation. And I thought, and really, as you know, this podcast kind of originated from my daughter being called Bossy. Um, but these two instances happening so close together in time made me, it really reinforces that sort of, it's not bossy, it's speaking up for yourself, and speaking up for others too. And seeing value, I think maybe it originates in seeing value in yourself and what you have to say. And then the next step is having the courage to actually say it to other people.
Yes, certainly. Saying something is wrong. Um, yeah, just voicing it. That's amazing. Just voicing it. Because then I mean, clearly you're a norm breaker. Um, but what's interesting is that norm is already broken, but now not deep down. That's what we're witnessing. So
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, your daughter was called Bossy by her instructor at
Yeah.
school.
Hmm.
And I'm pretty sure if you told her instructor, should girls be empowered today, she would probably say, of course,
Right.
right? So everyone, but at the same time, here comes a context where the instructor felt your daughter was lacking respect.
Yeah.
But then the question is, would she have called a little boy saying the same thing, bossy?
Right.
And that's unclear. And maybe it was the case, right? But
Right.
that's the whole point on how deep these things run, right? It's again about those schemas we have, and we can reason that our schemas are obsolete and that we shouldn't have them, but it's very difficult to then enact it in every setting. So you can slip very easily, and that's okay, I think, as long as you know you're slipping. Yeah. And that's not okay with children. but
Right.
but um, when I see people slip, I don't get angry at all, but I do address it with the person. And so, for instance, in my line of business, I'm with businessmen a lot.
Right.
I'm with old businessmen often,
Yeah.
and they are just from another generation. And so I know there's no sympathy or empathy for that, but sometimes they say things that are, and I know those things were completely normal 40 years ago.
Right.
Um, Such as I went to a meeting once and I had my crazy hair. I have very curly hair. And, as a researcher, that's a schema. It's easy. Researchers are not expected to look like a laureate. So
Einstein was known for his hair.
right,
Right. Yeah.
exactly. So I went with my my hair au naturel,
Yeah.
very crazy hair. And this man looks at me and says, I know you could have straightened your hair for this meeting. And I'm like, it's why? Do you know how long it takes me to straighten this hair?
Yeah.
It's about an hour and a half. And if I do that, I do no more research. So
Yeah.
it's research or hair.
Right.
And I'm not a L'Oreal girl. Voila.
Right.
And his answer was like, it's a courtesy. And where, I look back at him, and here is this 65-year-old man,
Yeah.
balding.
You could
And
have done something about your hair too, sir.
I
Yeah.
could have been so nasty,
Yeah.
right? And I just told him, what you're saying, like, is impossible to hear today. Like, be careful with the younger generation, because this was okay. I know 40 years ago, but this is not okay anymore. It's okay. I
Yeah.
have clean hair. It's curly. Get over it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and he looked at me and he was stunned and he didn't know what to say. And he said, but no, I love women. And I said, okay, fine. Yeah, you love a certain idea of women.
Yeah.
And that's what is now inappropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's it. So I don't doubt you love women, who
Right.
present well with their little bag and their little,
Right.
and
Hmm.
their heels. And but that's not okay. You have to know it's actually pretty offensive if you say that
Yeah.
to right? Imagine if I mention anything about your hair,
Oh, I
right?
know. Right.
And he said, "Oh, yeah," and then it hit him. But it was so far remote in
Yeah.
his intention, right? He meant it as a benevolent remark.
He was like helping
He
you.
really did. He really
Right.
did. And he likes me where he's someone I really appreciate.
Yeah.
But all of this to say, I think it's pretty sterile and yeah, unproductive to just burn people. And that's what unfortunately I see since Me Too. It's kind of a finger pointing, witch hunt
Yeah.
kind of
This like
oh
cancel
yeah.
culture for, yeah.
And it was just another world. And sometimes if it's a Harvey
Right.
Weinstein, then you're clearly
You
overboard.
need to, right. Yes. You need to
Uh,
say something.
but more than a few individuals a la Weinstein, I think the big problem is that big crowd in the middle.
Hmm.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
That doesn't intend badly, but they do put women in a box.
Yeah.
And that may be the cumulative effect of that is perhaps more pernicious. No, I shouldn't say that. The other type is terrible. But you
Yeah.
see what I mean.
I do.
Um, and I much prefer collaborating with these people and talking. Even talking is tricky, right? Because when you say, look, it's very mindless. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, because I mean, of course, no, 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 not at all. I'm extremely respectful of women, right? And like it unfortunately it doesn't have to do with respect or lack of respect, right? It's fundamentally the way you uh understood the contours of what a woman is,
Hmm.
a woman can do, cannot do, sorry, and what a woman should and should not do.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in a work environment, when you assess two people with the same career, a man and a woman, your reading grid is fundamentally different. So that's what I'm interested in
Yeah.
with men. And I find many men are very happy to talk about it.
Do you think that we can realistically shift the cultural narrative around this topic of women being too much and or you know wanting to take away the two part of it and can we really shift, do you think,
Absolutely.
perception?
So one thing we know about stereotypes is stereotypes are a moving target. Yeah. So the stereotype of a girl today is not the same as a stereotype of a girl in the 1920s,
Sure.
thankfully.
Yeah.
Right? So it's shifting. So it is shifting with society. Now the question you're asking is, can we shift it faster?
Yeah.
Accelerate? Absolutely. But human nature doesn't change overnight. Yeah. So I'm very, what would be the word? Yeah, I'm a little careful with revolutions. I don't think revolutions, if you look at revolutions, they
But
tend
you're
to go,
French.
Well, exactly.
Maybe that's why. Yeah.
Uh, I'm French, and we have today a president ever since the 1950s, a president who's almost a king. Okay,
Right.
so clearly we haven't really gotten rid of our
It's true.
royalty as much as we'd like to
Mhm.
claim. Um, so the French Revolution is fantastic in terms of the ideals and the human rights, and you know the ideal points are fabulous. Yeah, did it allow the society to get closer to this ideal? In some way, yes. In some ways, no. So, for instance, if you look at the power of women in society, it's actually gone down since the French Revolution. Yeah, I mean, if you're interested, that's not my opinion. Huh? It's I read a lot of history,
Yeah.
and one of the worst things that's happened to women in France is Napoleon. Yeah, because Napoleon has made a whole organization of society that really divided roles between men and women. Yeah, so yes, there was divorce, and that was a relative progress, right, and an opening of freedom. But women in high society had way more power, and so they could influence the laws and the decision making at the highest levels of society, and all of that became completely male dominated.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, revolutions, be careful. I think it takes time. I think it takes one conversation at a time with people around you. I think it takes everyone to make that change happen. So in terms of what that means for each woman and each man, we haven't talked about men, but they are really important to bring on board.
Yeah.
Is become aware of this knowledge we have about self-censorship of women, right? We need men who are fully aware, who will champion women, and who will also be ambassadors to other men. Yeah, these men
Yeah.
will be more influenced by men than by women in
Right.
changing fundamentally the way they relate to women. And it does happen, but it happens with a conversation, with small baby steps. But if everyone takes baby steps every day at a large scale, of course. And I think one wonderful enabler are businesses, organizations. Yeah, organizations are mini tribes
Yeah.
where at a given level you can have values and you can talk about it. You can attract people who are like-minded, whether
Yeah.
men or women, who want this to happen. And so it's the commerce has always been an enabler of getting closer to ideals. Yeah,
Hmm.
because you have this kind of countries within the countries, right?
Right.
Mini nations, where you bring a group of people with a solid intention to change the world in any given direction, and boom, you hope to make it happen. Yeah. Um, so yeah, of course it can happen. No question about that. That's and I don't think I'm a particularly big Pollyanna there. I mean, we do
Yeah.
see, look at where we are now compared to, I have I go to dinners with a bunch of women, and it's interesting because I'm really the type, having grown up in the environment I grew up
Yeah.
in. I don't particularly seek out all female environments.
Hmm.
That's not my natural habitat.
Right. No.
But it's a lot of fun because it's a bunch of feminists, but from every generation. So I literally know some women who walked with Simone de Beauvoir, in
Oh,
the
wow.
first few years of feminism, and they have a certain idea of feminism. And then you have the latest feminists, yeah, who personally I'm less close to, who are like super hardcore,
Right.
almost anti-men, which I
Yeah.
can't possibly conceive. Um, and it's kind of interesting to talk about these different perceptions of feminism, and you can see how the first feminists, they were starting in a desert of
Yeah.
rights, and what they achieved is so massive. And the more recent generation is very dogged and aggressive, and they fail to appreciate. They keep saying to the older generation, "You didn't do enough," but the older generation say, "Look, hang on, we didn't start from the same starting point."
Right.
Okay, so
Exactly.
be a little appreciative of how different life is today. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
You look at, we have female doctors there was no female doctor like 40, 50 years ago in France. That didn't exist. You went to a gynecologist, it was a male doctor,
Right.
right? I mean, you didn't get to choose anything.
Right.
Judges are now much more equal. We still struggle with a few jobs like engineers. We don't have many
Right.
CEOs. We have very few women, right? Presidents in France were not there, right? I mean, we're super behind. But it is getting better, right? And it does take tackling one context at a time.
Thank you so much for joining
Welcome.
us today. It was enlightening and I like this positive note at the end that we are making progress because it's easy to think that we aren't because it doesn't seem fast enough. But I think that what you say is right. It's one conversation at a time, and it's valuing ourselves and it's valuing men too. I think, like you said, one type of feminism is very anti-male, and that gets no one nowhere. We share the planet, right, with them.
Well, it gets us even in a more dangerous direction that we are seeing now, which is if you are a woman anti-man, you're going to get men anti-women. And we
Right.
are seeing that come back
Yeah.
with very extreme groups, claiming even ownership of women. I mean, it's incredible what we hear in
Yeah.
media. Um, I think that the most beautiful thing we have in human relationships, to me, it's a man and a woman discussing without being romantically involved, without having economic ties, just a guy and a girl at a bar having a drink and leisurely talking about society, the world. That's wonderful. If you think of that, it's
Yeah.
amazing. It doesn't happen everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the world I want to live in. It's just having being able to go out with a guy and he's not necessarily a homosexual friend, right? He
Right.
can, we're just talking. It's just two human beings talking.
Hmm.
Because what strikes me, and again, we have plenty of data, is men and women together produce the best of humanity. I mean, we see it. Organizations with more gender balance perform better and people are happier in them. Why aren't we going closer to that? I don't know.
Yeah.
So we know it's only beneficial. Yeah. So I really think you need to, in terms of what can your auditors do, like starting today, it's waking up in the morning and thinking, okay, who is the man I'm going to talk about this with in a
Hmm.
non-threatening way, in a constructive way, where I'm going to try and question myself and how I could maybe get heard more. And how am I, and is he going to be able to, come to my side and become aware that
Yeah.
maybe we need more championing inside of organizations, for instance, for this change to happen
Yeah.
somewhat
Fast.
faster.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, thank you so
Oh,
much,
welcome.
Anne-Laure, for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I can't wait till the next time I hear you speak. So I'm sure that you are somewhere very soon on another panel or a discussion, or you pop up everywhere talking about time, talking about leadership, talking about, all of these things. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. But have a great rest of your day.
You too, Catherine.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.